Hello, everybody. We're here with Trent Reedy, and we're going to have some fun. He's going to talk about his books, his career, his experience a little bit in Afghanistan, and something related to that, I hope. And now I've forgotten the other author's name, Trent, so you'll have to help me when
Oh,
the time
my,
comes. Okay.
sure.
But we're very happy to have him here because we have a number of writers and also readers who are interested in what writers add to their work, how they come to that work and why they're doing it. So we're going to have some fun today. Um, Trent Reedy has actually been a friend of Auntie's bookstore for a long time. He's been very helpful. He comes in at Christmas time every year and volunteers to be one of the temporary sellers and stands around and talks to customers and signs books. So he's just one of those all-around nice guys. You and Jess Walter, you're just, wonderful. Anyway, um, I wanted to ask you right up front, Trent, you write middle readers by and large, right? And when did you get started and why did you choose that particular genre?
That's a great question. Thanks for asking, and thanks everybody for what do we call what's the verb? Clicking in or tuning in or zooming in. Thank you for zooming in or for watching this recording later. How did I get into? So I write a middle grade and also some young adult novels. And how did I get into that is a good question. I always wanted to be a writer ever since I was in fourth grade. Now, yeah, this was a while ago when I was in fourth grade, and the world was different. And in those days, you know, most everybody went to work. I didn't want to go to school that day, so I said to my mom, I don't want to go in. I just want to stay home. She said, well, nobody gets to stay home. I have to go to work. You have to go to school. That's just life. That that was so depressing because at school they had been saying, oh, you could do anything you want to do. Well, I wanted to stay home. Um, and that's the one thing they never tell you you can't do that. But I always also love telling stories and love books. So then fourth grade hit me. Oh man, I got it figured out. I will become a writer, uh, and then I'll be able to work from home. What do you think about that, Mom? She's like, that's great. Get in the van. We got to go. And and but to become a writer, I went to the University of Iowa, majored in English. Um, Probably worried my parents quite a bit there, although my father was encouraging. Um, and to pay for University of Iowa, I enlisted in the Iowa Army National Guard as as a combat engineer, which is to say, I work with explosives and landmines and all the machine guns, but a lot of explosive stuff, which I wasn't interested in. But the training period for that is one of the shortest training periods in. So you get to basic training and job training back to college in the fall. Um, and so that is what I became. And of course, then we had 9/11, and eventually I was shipped to Afghanistan, which this will be important later if I can remember it, which at the time I thought was a huge interruption to my writing career. I had by that time drafted a beginning, middle, and novel length manuscript, and it was dreadful. I was incapable of understanding the incredible number of faults. I mean, it was not a usable manuscript. Um, but all the writing books said, keep sending it out. You're going to get a lot of rejections. Had the war not come along, I had not been shipped out, I would have kept sending that manuscript out and burning all these bridges and destroying my career. So I'm so glad that, in some way, I guess I can thank the Taliban for stirring up this big problem and forcing me to stop sending that manuscript out. So that'd be the only thing I would thank those monsters for. And at some point, though, while I was there, um, I just the ideas for stories that kept coming into my mind were about young people. It is this shouldn't be surprising in some ways, right? It's the greatest human adventure is growing up, right? There's so much more possibilities for stories. I could write a novel about, let's say, some 10, 11, 12-year-old boys who decide they're going to build a raft and have an adventure floating down the Spokane River or something. Anything can happen. But if I wrote that about three grown men, then people are just going to say, well, how come these guys aren't at work? What are they? Why are they spending all day dinking with a raft? So I just felt like and feel like there's so much more potential um, for dramatic story, and that is so that is what led me to begin to write um, literature for young people, books for young people. We were um, and this mission in Afghanistan that I thought was going to be, you didn't think I was going to get back to the point. You got to be quick. You got to be quick with me. This mission that I thought was the an interruption in my career, the end of my career, such that it was sort of the beginning and the biggest opportunity. We were on a mission to this village that looks like a child's sandcastle, except that you can walk through it. It's all made out of mudstone. The Afghans have walls everywhere. And we encountered this young girl who suffered, she was maybe 11 or so, 11 to 13. She suffered from birth from cleft lip. So her top lip never joined together when she was born. It's different than cleft palate. It's sort of a better problem to have than cleft palate, where the entire cleft palate, the entire roof of the mouth doesn't join together. But her teeth stuck out straight forward through the gap in her lip. And she was very self-conscious about this. She wasn't old enough. Afghan girls of her age didn't cover their whole faces nearly as much. They would, they would cover their hair. That was about it. But she was always hiding her mouth, very shy about it, which was understandable. So we knew we had to find a way to help this girl. But the Army, they couldn't justify the expense, or I don't know why, but they wouldn't send a helicopter to pick her up. We had an Army doctor on our main airbase who could do the surgery, the corrective surgery, and but they wouldn't send a helicopter. So we took money out of our own paychecks, my fellow soldiers and I, to pay for civilian transportation to send this girl, whose name was Zuleika, to our main airbase at Bagram, where she got this surgery. When she came back to us, she was completely different. I didn't understand then that medical science could fix this problem. She just had this little scar and some stuff on her lip to prevent infection, but she was normal again. I mean, so the difference is she could say words like marshmallow. She doesn't speak English. Can't imagine why she would ever say marshmallow, but she can make that sound. She can close her mouth to drink and eat. It's a profound difference. And she, won't be as much of an outcast. If you can think about something, if you ever were made fun of about something. I had an enormous, now my face is fattened up, but when I was younger and skinnier, my nose was huge and people would make fun of me. But it wasn't like that. And okay, so we're these guys from this foreign country, different language, all these weapons. We show up to her village and we're looking for you. Right? I thought she must have been terrified. Who wouldn't be? She faced this whole thing with this wonderful, quiet courage and dignity. So the last time I saw Zuleika when she was leaving our base, now she couldn't hear me. She couldn't understand English, but I promised that I would do whatever I could to tell her story, or a story very like hers. And in the Army, you gotta be really careful about making promises because it's not negotiable. They have to be kept. So that is what started me on my crazy quest when I returned home from the war to writing this book. It's unlikely that a guy like me who's never been a girl and never been an Afghan would write and publish his book. But I did in January of 2011, I think. and a lot of people have responded to it very well. And from there, I have been blessed to be writing ever since. Um, and so that's how I got it. That's a long answer to your question. How did I get into books for young people?
And that's Words in the Dust, right?
Words in the Dust. Sorry. Yes, I should
No,
plug that title.
that's why I've got the
Books are
list.
sold.
Well, that's wonderful. You know, I'm not sure everybody has the same reasons for writing what they do and for the age groups that they do. And so it's, you know, it's really nice to hear your explanation of your personal thing. Um, I recently heard too, what was the book? Was his name Jamal or
Jawad Arash.
Jawad Arash? Yeah. And I understand there's going to be an article come out soon in Inlander. It's going to be the front page story about this, but I'm going to let you tell us just a tad about it first. So
Sure,
watch for
sure.
that.
Well, you read my mind. The next part on my notes. So we're always doing just fine, you and I.
Yeah.
Yeah, that story. More about this will be featured, and this is September 6th as we were recording this, so it will be available in the next Inlander close to September 6th. But while I was in Afghanistan, I was in a city called Farah, which is in the western part of the country, closer to Iran. When we first arrived, our base was not constructed yet, so we had to rent an Afghan residential house. This is all made out of mud brick. And all Afghan properties, it's kind of a cool thing. They're all surrounded by walls. So where we would have the edge of our property, and it's a grass wall, or not grass wall, grass lawn, they would have at the edge of their properties with no grass, a huge wall. Now I'm 6'4", and this wall was like a good 2 or 3 foot taller than me. And it's about a foot and a half wide. And so we built platforms halfway up so that we could stand on the platform and look or shoot as necessary over the wall. I was on guard duty one day, and this is the probably the worst way to begin what became one of my best, most cherished friendships. Really, I was on guard duty, and this Afghan kid comes up to me and he says, "Oh, hello, how are you?" And a lot of kids, because there was a book floating around town that was like how to learn English. And in this book was an exercise where it's meant to be a call and response, where someone says, "Hello, Ahmed, how are you?" And then Ahmed says, "I'm fine, thank you." But what the kids would do is read the whole thing. So they would walk up to us and say, "Hello, how are you? I'm fine, thank you." And then and then we were like, "Hey, nice talking to you." but this guy, Joe, we call him, for security purposes, we call him Jawad Arash. That's his pen name. He came up and he knew English, and which was kind of neat. We had just arrived. It was very hot. I was very afraid. My army training back in Texas for this war was terrible, and it was very hot and sunny. So Jawad tries to walk up into the shade next to my wall. We had all this training about suicide bombers and everything. So back away from the wall, I said. And he's like, "What? It is hot. It's so hot today. I'm not hurting your wall." So then, watch all these war movies. Backed away from my wall. And I'm ashamed. Okay, but so he backed up into the heat. That's a terrible way to begin a friendship. Excuse me. Thinking that your friend is a suicide bomber. But we talked more and got to know each other. He liked to practice his English. He would come to our base to practice his English. And then I gave him, before I left, this was 18 years ago, I was there in 04, 05, and as a 04, I gave him a piece of paper, said, "Hey, this is an email address. You have to have this thing called the internet." They were lucky to have electricity. It was getting better. We made a lot of progress. Just while I was there, and certainly a decade since. But and he held on to that scrap of paper with that email address. So then when he finally did get an email address, the very first email he sent was to me. And so we stayed in touch electronically. Man, I'm glad he held on to that paper, that address. And then a couple of years ago, we just got to talking, and I said, you know, because he expressed an interest in writing. I was like, well, you're in Afghanistan. You got to have a million stories there. So when did you first encounter the Americans? When did you first like see them? And he said, well, you know, B-52 bomber was flying overhead. I mean, that had to be scary, right? Like we would see a B-52 and like, there goes our boys, but he's in a very different situation. How did he find out about September 11th attacks? Because TVs were against the law in Taliban controlled Afghanistan. But they had a rug business, so that one of them brought in a VHS tape wrapped up in the rug, and then they watched this recording from some illegal satellite TV of like CNN or something, and they were, you know, saddened for such a horrific attack, and they were terrified as Americans started to mention Afghanistan. They thought these guys are going to be so mad, and they're going to be coming after all of us, for, you know, for what a handful of psychopaths in this country have contributed to. So we started talking about those things, how we met, and we got this idea to write this book, which in May of 2021 was published, of the war experience, the early Afghanistan war experience, from the soldiers' perspective and from the Afghans' perspective. And I mean, it's fiction, okay? It's different people, slightly different time, but all of the things are based on things that happened. My editor once read this. I told you the training in Texas for going to the war was terrible, and my editor once said, "This is terrible. We can't put this in the book. Like, did you guys actually do this in training?" Was, oh yeah, many times. It was pointless, and it was, you know, deeply offensive. But we published that in 2021 in May, and then what the Inlander pieces will be about, of course, by August 2021, our mission was betrayed, and everything that we fought for, the schools that we opened, especially for the girls, you know, because they'd had it rough. Taliban hate women and girls for some reason. We really wanted to help them, and we did help them. The voting, you know, that we helped set up, just the general peace and stability so people could build, set up, you know, cell phone towers, get the internet going, get their streets fixed, build houses. All of that was destroyed. And all the people who served with us, our interpreters, our guards, our cooks, so were abandoned, betrayed, and terrible, terrible danger. So that began a 2-year nightmare, because I had a, you know, deep personal responsibility with the money, part of the money from that I earned from writing Enduring Freedom, I used to purchase a hot tub on my deck. Jawad used his money to build a house in Afghanistan. He was proud. Oh, it was beautiful. I saw the, you know, the plans. It was just this great place. I can't say what city. It's dangerous, but he built it, and he'll never get to live there. It's gone. He had to go on the run. And I thought, if the Taliban find out who he is and that he wrote this book, I don't want to, you know, spoiler alert. This is an anti-Taliban book. I don't know if there is such a thing in America. There's someone in America that's publishing a whole bunch of real positive Taliban literature. I don't want to know that guy. But he's in all kinds of danger. So it was 2 years. And again, the Inlander piece, you can read more about it. But I'll ruin the end of the Inlander piece. I am thrilled. 25 July of this year, he made it. We finally got the student visa approved, and boy, I got the flight and met him there when he's got a wife and three wonderful little kids. The youngest was a big problem for us because he didn't have a passport and he didn't have all these paperwork that you need, you know, right before the betrayal. So he was like, we talk about anchor babies. It was a different kind of anchor baby. It's like they couldn't go and he couldn't take this kid because he didn't have the paperwork, and they were all there and they were all safe. And it was to be able to tell his, especially his wife, welcome home, and you're going to be okay, and your kids are going to be okay. They're going to go to school, and they're going to have all the books they could ever think to read, and it's going to be fine. You're good now. It's over. We did it, and you're safe. And I'm not going to get much more of that. The Islander can and you can, to know what the war meant to me and to Jawad, you can read Enduring Freedom if you're interested. But the point of that, the reason I bring that up, if it's okay if I go on with this other thing that I wanted to mention, is because this I didn't. Other guys are tougher. I served with some tough soldiers. I served with soldiers. They did the Somalia thing, the Black Hawk Down thing. I served with guys that did the Ranger School. Oh, I could never make it through that. Forget about it. I served with some. I just wanted to pay for college money. I just wanted to pay for college so I could be a writer. And I did love the mission, though. I loved helping Afghanistan, helping the people rebuild. But I wasn't this thing trying to get my co-writer and his kids to safety. I didn't do. It was really tough. So I've been thinking a lot lately about life and about writing and being a writer, and what that means, because I do a lot of talks, and I talk to a lot of people, and don't let me go on too long. Make sure we get time for questions if there are any. But I was hoping if I could to just talk sort of in general about writing and being a writer and the writing life. Now, if you are watching this or tuned into zooming this for a more practical writing suggestions or tips, good luck for you, because I'm going to be doing a book show, writing talk at Spokane Valley Library on Saturday, 28 October at 9:30. I can't remember if you have to pay for that or not, but let me tell you, it is really, I'm not the only guy doing this thing. Otherwise, don't pay that much. But it's a really great, they have writers in all day and most of it is really, really valuable tips about practical things that you can use for your writing. But I wanted to talk about the writing life. When something terrible happens, you're dealing with something really hard, you start to, maybe I'm the only guy, but I start to question, like, why am I doing this? Like, what's even the point of anything in the face of this horrific, in the face of this impending tragedy with my friend? What's the point of writing? And to be fair, I didn't get much writing done during the time, but some. My father was a natural gas pipeliner, like his father before him. And they got to keep the natural gas going through those pipes to keep people in the Midwest, keep their homes heated and their stoves running, and all kinds of things. But so he went to work and he worked for this many hours and he got this much money, and it was predictable. Being a writer is, and being a writer is not that way. It's completely uneven. And you don't know. You're always hoping for the next book contract. But maybe not some. I don't expect Stephen King is super worried, or J.K. Rowling spends a lot of time agonizing. Oh, boy, am I ever going to get another publishing contract? That'd be okay. So some publishers gonna be willing to look at that manuscript. But a lot of writers, I think, me especially, and I know other writers who have this challenge. It takes a lot of like a certain kind of faith, and that can mean the faith at your church or your synagogue or whatever. But and that's certainly the case for me, but also just sort of a faith that this can work out, that that your writing ambition or even your next writing goal can work out, just takes a huge illogical commitment of faith that could work out. I mean, all faith is illogical, no matter what anybody tells you. I've got the proof that this scripture is, well, if you have to have proof, then it's not, and that's not faith, man. That's a different thing. I promise I'm not going to get deep into theology, so everybody can relax. I don't want to be that guy. But I talk. But the point is, I talk to people who they'll say they have faith in the opposite. They like they place their faith in the opposite of it's ever going to work. I'm like, well, I always wanted to kind of publish a book. I was going to write a book, but maybe I'm just not meant to do it. Maybe maybe it's just the faith. Just that's not for me. Like that's. You're that guy's deliberately choosing to believe that it can never happen. I mean, it probably won't. It's just this. I'm between contracts right now for my sanity. I spent a lot of this time trying to help my friend Reedy. My stars. I bought all these books. A lot of aunties, a lot, and they're books about people who work in the bookstore or work in libraries, bibliophilic books, or sometimes books about writers, but mostly books about readers, some nonfiction, some fiction. And I had about 50 of these, and I just chose to read them all in 1 year. I'm a very slow reader, which is unfortunate for a guy who dedicates his life to books, but other people read much more fast, and so I sat down to I'm going to read all 50 of these books this year, and then also my audiobook time, because I don't drive, shower, clean, work out without an audiobook going. Otherwise, all those things are a tremendous waste of time. Time that could be spent reading. And so it's like 79 bibliophilic books, and it was just sort of a way of keeping myself together, having something else besides this constant worry. I could worry whether I don't understand it in England. There's something called a council. I don't understand how this government system works, but I know that English people, they're always afraid to what seems to be, from the books that I read, the council's main job is to try to close down public libraries and replace them with corporate chain coffee shops, because that came up like 2 or 3 times. About like, what these evil councils that are trying to close all the libraries. And so I would encourage you all, no matter where you are in your writing process, to continue to believe that like you're going to achieve that next writing goal. You're going to publish that book, or you're going to publish another one, or you're going to improve the manuscript you're working on. And you got to believe that even when nobody else will, especially when nobody else does. If you need other people's validation, then it's never, because it's always such a long shot. It always is. And so it's hard to hold on to it. And you have to believe this is going to happen when you don't think it's going to happen. Which is that crazy, illogical leap of faith is the only thing keeping me writing. I'm in that scary spot between contracts because I wrote so little during the difficult time.
Thanks, Trent. I am going to open it up. I think
okay,
have some
it's
things
good to do.
To ask you about. This has been wonderful. I really appreciate you sharing like this. This is wonderful. Thank you. I'm sure everybody appreciates it too. So
definitely.
Do we have some questions, folks?
Well, I hope
yeah.
so.
I actually have a couple of questions, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation. Trent, first of all, thank you. And thank you for your service and for your courage in writing. So my first part of my question, I'm not going to throw it all at you at once. So my family and I were homeless during COVID, and we experienced a lot of different things, being on the streets and dealing with different people, mainly great people, you know. So we started writing about our journeys. Like some of these stories, it's hard to imagine, but they happened to us, like we were there. So my first part of my question is, you mentioned protecting the identity of your partner. Um, like, what advice would you give? Like, we want to write the story, we're writing the stories, but it's about us. And there are tons of people who helped us, who other people told them not to help, or people who we were stuck on the street one time and just picked us up and took us to their home. Like, we don't want to expose people by their names and their good nature, but we want to show that through everything, there's a common thread of kindness and generosity and humanity in people. So what advice would you give in terms of protecting the privacy and the protection of people's identity, besides changing names, like in your experience?
Are you writing fiction or nonfiction?
So that's the crazy part. So we published one book already that was a memoir. It was basically my story of how I got ill, how I dealt with it, how I lost my job, and so forth. But I didn't put anything in there about the entire family and our journey. So it comes across as an autobiography in a way, because everything happened, and we're just telling stories. Like, for example, we're from South Florida, so we told a story of how we went to the beach to take a shower because there's a public shower we can use, and for like a couple of weeks, only place we could take a shower. So, and someone starts saying, "Hey, I got something that you can do instead," and so we had different options, but that's something that it really happens. So I'm not sure if it would be better if we change the name, put it as a fictional story, or just tell the truth, because the truth is what it is. There are people out there who are generous, who are kind, and who understand and try to help other people without selfish gain.
First of all, I'm sorry that you had to endure such hardship. There are some Linda was saying these have been very difficult few years for many people. I think the key to this maybe is I would ask you to explore the notion of truth, and to think about the best way this story could be told. And the best way the story can be isn't necessarily just a recitation of facts. Supposing you had kept meticulous notes, like a diary, down to the minute, down to the hour, and recorded every day, and this is what happened, and wrote down transcripts of the conversations you had. Well, you could, publish that account, that very accurate recording of events. But I don't know that would be, I'm pretty sure that would not be the most effective way. And when I say effective, you have to think about what effect you want this story to have upon your audience, right? What kind of emotional impact and it can be lots. I mean, it could be a lot of different things, and you might want the story to anger people and convince them to do some more to help people that are facing similar challenges. You could, it could be, but what it sounds like, it could also be quite inspirational. You talk about the good people that you met. So I would consider what kind of story, because the effect that you have is going to be the effect that you want to have, that you want this story to have is going to have a profound impact upon which story, which episodes, which elements of your experience that you fictionalize or reveal in nonfiction. As far as protecting people, it's more of a matter of consistency. You mentioned, beyond changing names. I have found that protecting Jawad Arash's identity is more of a matter of practice. Just practice speaking the guy's pen name instead of his name, until I start to internalize in that way. And I don't reveal what cities he's been in, or what, especially when he was on the run from the Taliban. Didn't reveal what country we had to remove him from Afghanistan to another country. We kept that other country. Wasn't important to tell people what that was. So it's not always necessary to. How else would anybody identify the people except by name? What street they live on, their address? I don't understand. It wouldn't ever be really relevant to the story, I don't think, to have this street address or the exact location in Spokane. So, if you change the name of one of the people who assisted you to Jimmy Herbakowitz and say that he lived on the South Hill, or I'm just making things up, then that's a different guy. Especially if it's fiction, you can be anywhere. And you can have fictional characters that are quite similar to, but still different people from the real people who have inspired those characters. So again, I'm sorry for the difficulties that you endured, but I hope that I can't make that not happen now. I mean, that's something that that seems to be inspiring your writing, and I'm intrigued by the language that you had, talking about the aspect of hope and the kindness and the neat people that you encountered in that experience. I think that's an intriguing original element that a lot of people would be excited to read. I think it could help a lot of people. And next question.
Well, you actually answered two of my other parts to the question, so thank you for that. That was very well done. I appreciate it, and thank you for your understanding. So my final question is more of a personal one. How do you deal with the trauma of the memories? Because I realized in the unpacking of our own situation, we sit together as a family, we're like, wow, just mind blown, right? So does it work better for you to have a group of peers who had similar experiences, or does it work better with you to have like a mentor, someone who's like a semi-professional, in dealing with emotional trauma and mental health, and have them guide you so that you could, deal with everything and all the memories and so forth? Thank you again.
Thank you. I'll just say I deal with it very badly. And, I would always I do these talks, and I write a semi-monthly column for the Washington Examiner magazine. It's military anecdotes, and sometimes it's just short 650-word pieces, and sometimes I write about soldiers or service members who have struggled with emotional challenges related to their service. And at the end of those pieces, I always encourage service members to seek the mental health resources that are available to them. And I would repeat that now for anyone who's listening. But you ask how deal with the trauma, and I would just myself very badly, not very good at it. I feel like there's so much to story of the nightmare of trying to get my friend and his family to safety. This is such a big story that he's going to need a book length account of some kind. But I'm just glad he's back. I've just finally started to be able to sleep through the night. Most nights, some of the nightmares have backed off finally, and I don't know, like take a break, I guess. But on the other hand, people need to know that it's not over. We have tens of thousands. I have a guy. He was one of our guards at our base. Taliban nabbed him, arrested him, and they tortured him for months. The Taliban, they're psychotic. I guess they need evidence when they arrest somebody. I don't know why. That seems to be a pretty inefficient means for a psychotic regime with no laws. And he didn't break, and he could have given up a lot of people. So stuff like that. It's hard to deal with. I don't have a very good answer for your question. That's what I should have said. I'm sorry for pretending like I did.
That's okay, Trent. That's okay.
Let's have another question. Let's have a funny question. Who wants to ask about
Appreciate that.
I think Chris had wanted to ask a question. She's way back. She raised her hand.
Well, I was curious, Trent, you had mentioned that after going to Afghanistan, you kind of gave up on that story that you wrote before you left. So, I mean, how did you know to give up on that story instead of to keep trying with it?
Right. That's a $1 million question. Well, it's trickier than that. When I returned, because it's like I said, when you have this huge thing that blows up in your life, like going to the war or having your entire mission betrayed and thrown away, and all your guys abandoned and in danger, it causes you to rethink a lot of things. So that I was in the war thinking, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? I was maybe 26, and I thought I had all this more college money coming because they were inventing this thing called post 9/11 GI Bill. And I thought, whoa, it'd be great if I was eligible for that. And I wasn't. But I still went to get an MFA because I read in this book an interview with an agent, and the agent said he was impressed by MFA. So I thought, what is an MFA? It's a Master of Fine Arts degree. If you are watching this online and didn't know, I didn't know. So I did the MFA in writing for children and young adults at Vermont College of Fine Arts. It's a low residency program. If you have questions about studying writing or something, by all means, I'm available on different social media stuff. And so and I knew in the program I wanted to work on Words in the Dust because this seemed like a hard book, and I would benefit from guidance from experienced writers who were my teachers. When I went back to look at the manuscript that I had been writing before I deployed, after the MFA, I could see many, many problems. So what I did was I made a list, a summary, like a hopelessly undetailed summary of what happens in the book. And then I opened a new file, and from page 1, just a ground up rewrite of the book, thinking about many of the concepts that I had since had the opportunity to learn, and wrote a much better manuscript, which turned into my second novel, which is called Stealing Air. It's about these 3 boys from Iowa, because I was from Iowa, who build an experimental aircraft. It's got skateboards for wheels. It's so much fun. So the broader question, the implication, your question is, how do you know how long to stay with a manuscript? I think, as useful as answers I could think of, longer than people generally think. Like longer than you might think, but consider you've revised it before. Maybe it's been rejected, or maybe it's just you can't figure out how to get it to work. When you're going to make that new revision pass, think about how you can revise it differently. What can you add? You know, maybe in the meantime, you go to, you know, attend a Zoomer seminar from a writer who will reveal to you some kind of technique, some kind of advice about how to look at that manuscript, so that when you go back to revise that same old manuscript again, you can look at it from a different perspective. Consider if you're very familiar with it, consider rewriting the thing. Consider, you know, just you could try what I do, make a summary of what's there, and then open a new file and rewrite from the summary, adjusting as you go. Sometimes that'll give you a fresh look at it. When I say that, it can seem really daunting. I would never have imagined doing that when I was working really hard to write that first manuscript that became my second book. The more manuscripts we write, the cheaper they get. Like the more words we write, the easier they come by, the cheaper they are. And you can throw them away, you can chop that off, and you can get closer to that position where you're like, I'll put this aside, or I'm giving up on this. It takes a lot of writing to get to that position. It's also consider, it's a big one. One of the most important things that I learned about writing. I learned this in writing school. There was a character in my first book called Words in the Dust. She had been a teacher in Afghanistan before the Taliban's first nightmare. Then she wasn't allowed to teach. And her purpose was to teach the protagonist, Zuleika, how to read and write, which had been denied her by the Taliban, and open rich Afghanistan culture to her. That was what this woman, former teacher, had to do. And in the first version, she was blind. The teacher was blind, and she lived in a cave. And my instructor's name was Margaret Bayshard at Vermont College of Fine Arts. She asked me, why is this character blind? And why does she live in a cave? So I said, well, you know, they don't have very good health care. It's always bright there, so bright, the sun all the time. And, you know, there's a lot of wars, so her house is probably blown up during the war. And Margaret Bayshard said, stop. I'm not asking you to create a backstory to justify the fact that she's blind and living in a cave. I'm asking why you, the story god, has chosen to make her blind and live in a cave when she could just have perfectly fine vision and have a house. There's no reason to hold on to the way you wrote it the first time. But here's the thing. I call this the Bayshard factor, named after my brilliant instructor, because it can be hard to break away from the first way that we imagine that story, right? The most important part of writing a book is revision. And the most important thing I've learned about revision is the difficulty and the importance of letting go of the first way we imagine the story and imagining it in very different ways. Crazy things that seem crazy at first, like what if the protagonist was the secondary character who I thought was a secondary character, but maybe that's who the story's about. Well, I gave that, and I can see by the look on your face, you're saying, well, I wonder what happened in Words in the Dust. I let the character have perfectly good eyes and gave her an apartment in the back of her sewing shop. And suddenly it was so much easier to get my protagonist there. It was hard to get her to climb the mountain and go in the cave, because that's a weird thing to do. But it was very easy to get her to go to the shop. Nobody has ever approached me and said, you know, I like Words in the Dust, but I think it would be much better if the teacher character was blind and lived in a cave. Nobody has ever brought up that criticism. So think about ways to radically reimagine that story, right? Take some time to think about it. Go for a walk. I like to go for a walk with a cigar and a Robert Frost rock. And this time, being Spokane, very dry, very, 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 very careful with the ashes. So, not to have a fire. So yeah, that was how long to give up on it. That's a really hard question. But usually I would encourage people to hold on to it and don't put so many manuscripts. Oh man, they're brilliant. Students, you know, and they're like, I'm writing this. And I come back to them like a couple of years, like, hey, where's that awesome story about this robot spider, whatever. She's like, oh, you know, I kind of gave up on that. And I kind of, you know, I think I probably could have spun it like into a web of a story that would I could sell that thing in like 6 months, but they quit and they give up. So most of the time I would say, how long to keep working on that thing? Work on it longer than you think, right? Hold off on giving up. You got to have that faith I was talking about, that illogical belief that this is going to work out. But think about new ways to revise. Think about new techniques. Think about because it's about the effect that this thing has got to achieve. Not so much of what's happening, but the effect that what is happening has, the effect that those events has. And you can get to the effects that you need, whether it's your memoir or fiction about some time being houseless, or whatever story it is, you can get to those different effects in a lot of different ways. And that can really help you to shake that story up and overcome that Bayshard factor. That's a great question. Any other questions?
I think, Patrick, we've probably got time for at least one question. Patrick, you wanted to ask something, didn't you? I'm not hearing you, so maybe your volume's too low.
He's saying, oh, I wish that character had been blind and lived in a cave. He's the first one.
Yeah, we're not picking you up. Sorry.
Maybe he could type his question into the chat.
Yeah, go ahead and type into the chat.
Okay, I think he got it. This is a kind of a fun thing.
Yeah, sometimes the speakers aren't set right.
Okay, I see it. It just came up on the thing. It says, what do you think of writing groups? That's his question. What do I think of writing groups? Writing groups are fantastic. They can be tricky. I'm telling you, finding the right writing group is super hard. And I think the more you work on your writing, and the more you learn about writing and revision, the harder it is to find that writing group. If it's just kind of like you're checking in online, maybe, and like, hey guys, how's it going? And it's encouragement, okay. But okay, writing groups. So say you have a writing group, you're like, hey, you put up a flyer. We are all gonna meet the mezzanine at Auntie's bookstore, Spokane, after we purchase $75 of books each, and we're gonna meet there, and we're gonna have. You should do that. You should buy the books. Mine if you can, but there's lots of other books. But and then anyone can show up. So here's what you're gonna get. You're gonna get the guy who wants to hog the whole thing, right? Or woman. You're gonna get the person in there, and everybody switches manuscripts, and you're like, I really like your manuscript, but I don't understand why this teacher character has to be blind and live in a cave. What if this character had perfectly good vision and an apartment? And you have the guy in the group, and he's like, well, you don't understand my vision. He'll do that with his hand. My vision. And why is he in the group? Nobody knows, but he ruins it because there's no point. He doesn't want to listen to anybody. And so it can be, or the more experience you become about writing, sometimes you're kind of in there, maybe with people who haven't had the opportunity to practice as much or have as much. So you end up teaching instead of working on writing. That can be a real challenge. So a good writing group is, well, it's good. But it's tricky. And there's a lot of, okay, now I mentioned that I wasn't like the most hardcore soldier, but I was still a soldier. I could shoot the weapons, and I could do amazing things with explosives. It's really fascinating. There's a certain, so I don't like to get too deep into talking about fragile feelings and everything. But you have to access certain emotions to write a story. If I don't know, if you're trying to write like a romance, I love romance books. I'll admit it. I've been through a minefield, a literal minefield. I got nothing to prove to anybody. I love romance books. I will just say that. There's several there's a whole awesome section of romance books down at Auntie's Bookstore, Spokane. And you got to access like feelings for that, right? To make it believable, these two characters are into each other. And if you're in a writing group and some guy's like, that's pathetic. Have you ever even been couples skating at the junior high skating party? It doesn't seem like you know nothing about love or something like that. That's gonna, if you're thinking about that guy and you're like, I actually didn't have a partner at couple skating. That's when I would go to the arcade. This was over 5 years ago, but you know what I mean? Like people can cripple you really quickly, like cripple your ability to go forward in writing really quickly if because they make it about you, and it's not. Okay, here's the next important thing. You are not your writing. Writing isn't about talent. It's not a magic thing. It's not fate. It's not destiny. I know the Greeks had like this muse thing. Like, sorry if anyone out there is like believing in Zeus and stuff like that on a serious level. That's a myth. We call it that for a reason, right? Like your writing is your writing, and it can always be revised, and it can always be better. And people are like, well, I guess I'm not talented enough. Well, it's not. It's a thing on the page. Just make it better. So when I'm in a writing group, I always encourage people to talk about opportunities for revision, not because they're not necessarily problems, right? Like someone might say, why don't you have that character? Why is she blind and why does she live in a cave? That's an opportunity for revision. It's not necessarily a problem with the book, right? I can make the book probably still work with her being blind and living in a cave, right? And the author may have a totally different intention. So whenever I'm directing a workshop, we talk about opportunities for revision, not problems with the book. Well, one way you could fix this, who's to say it's broken, right? The author, that's who's to say it's broken, right? And so writing groups they're awesome. I mean, I've had some great writing teammates. But if you are in a writing group that you feel like is holding you back or is making it harder for you to write, jump ship. Above all, strongly consider the very realistic possibility that it's not you, it's the writing group, right? And that's not arrogance. That's just you knowing where you are in your writing and what you're about. So anyway, I hope that has some useful tips. The part about you not being your writing, that's critical. You gotta just disconnect yourself. It's a different thing. We feel bad and we get personal and wait. You get something published and there's a malicious negative review and it's real easy, real quick to be like, oh, that's easy, Well, a lot of those negative reviews do attack the writer, and I think that's a terrible part of our culture that we could do without. You know what I'm talking about? Like, this writer he's stupid and he's bad. Like, whoa, maybe you just didn't like the book. That's okay. Some of them are like, well, this book doesn't have enough exploding cars, combat. It's a romance novel set in a Bentley. It's not meant to have combat. I don't know. Get a different book. Right? But that's not, that kind of criticism, that doesn't mean you're a bad writer. It doesn't mean the author of those books or bad writers or bad people. This could be a silly review. Any other questions? Thanks for that.
Well, I think I need to let people know that they can leave without insulting anyone if they have a prior commitment, because we're a little after 3.
It's okay.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. We often go over, but I just want folks to know that, if they don't want to hang in, it's okay. We understand.
Sure. I blather and I wander.
You're wonderful. You're exactly what we want, because you're right there with your honest opinion and feeling, and that's obvious, and that's the best thing that helps everybody the most. So, hey, I was going to say that one of the times that I struggle with this personally because of my history, and one of the things that I think would be where you would say your writing is you is when you're writing a memoir, because whatever is attacked in the book is an attack on you, in a sense,
Right.
depending on how you've written it. So there's that, and so I think maybe a lot of people try to avoid that. I'm glad that Dwight was willing to write his, because it's yeah, not easy. But
Yeah, that makes me so much more afraid to write this memoir
Yeah.
with my co-writer.
how much does
Why?
having kids make it easier to write books for younger people?
Say again?
How much does having kids make it easier to write books for younger people? That's in the chat.
You know, I find myself drifting further from kidlit, being more interested in studying and trying other genres since becoming a father. I think my first five books were before I was a father, or I was yeah, I think yeah, because I had two published in the year my daughter was born, and I found I don't know, I found myself more interested in kidlit before I was a father. I'm sure as my young daughter gets older and socializes more, then it will be a greater source of inspiration. Definitely a source of hopefully a means of keeping current. When you are writing for young people, it's important to recognize that times change, and you can't have your kids being groovy with their pet rocks going home from school to watch the Brady Bunch on a console TV. So you got to. The hardest part about kidlit for me is, and maybe writing in general, a lot of our lives happens online. Like a lot of our interactions, our friendships, this meeting is all over the wire, and writing like life as it's happening in person and in the moment, but also writing a concurrent, huge, ongoing interaction online, I find to be difficult. That is almost certainly why I have set several of my novels, including my most recent trilogy of middle grade outdoor adventure novels, in places like McCall, Idaho, next to that massive Idaho wilderness where presumably cell phone coverage drops out. So that, oh, there it is. Oh man, I had a lot of fun. Right, Fishing and Fire is the came out, I think, in February. Very timely. Fires were a little close to, way too close to my house, and unfortunately too. Some people lost their homes, and at least one death around the Cheney area, Spokane area. So anyway, I had to write. That was Fishing and Fire. My mission was to write a fishing novel, and I thought, isn't a lot of fishing like kind of waiting? Here's a pro tip: if your characters are waiting for something and they're bored while they're waiting for something, your reader is so much more bored. I mean, it's boring to wait for something. How much more boring is it to watch or read about somebody waiting for something? So we want to just quickly tell, oh, I got so bored waiting, right? Now, fishing is different. I don't want to insult the fishing people that are into fishing, but it does take some patience, and that is hard to write about. So how are we going to spice this up? Bam! Throw in a forest fire.
I could just hear this. I was getting really bored watching my dad fishing until the grizzly showed up.
Right.
Opening line.
Right.
You can have that, Trent. I know you're going to rush out.
In my next fishing out adventure books. But someone asked like why I like books for young people, but in that whole trilogy, I really love the friendship dynamic. So it's not, you said, well, I don't like fishing, so I'm not going to read it. Oh, I don't go fishing either. Or I don't like hunting. I um, never hunted. Um, but um, but they're cool activities, and the background of this whole thing is this wonderful friendship dynamic because they're in tumultuous middle school times. I think they're heading into sixth grade, going into seventh grade, and it's some writers will say, "Oh, I never know what's going to happen in my book. I just ask my characters and I wait for them to tell me." And I'm like, whoa, hang on now. Wait. Um, what does that mean? Like the characters don't literally tell you, "Hey, write this. Why don't you make a check?" Right? Not because that's a serious psychological disorder, right? When you have voices independent of your own mind telling you things and surprising you with them. What? I didn't know that was. So it's a metaphor, right? I don't know. I can't speak for others, but I know that in this last trilogy, the McCall Mountain series, there were a lot of I call them a surprise relationship dynamics and emotional developments that were kind of like a surprise. I mean, I'm walking around with my cigar and Robert Frost rock, and oh man, yes, right. That's how to fix this book. That's how we're going to fix it. We're going to overcome the Bayshard factor, reimagine it in a totally different way that we didn't think of before, and it'll be so much better. And let me tell you, that is what's the best part about being a writer. I used to say, well, it's working at home, but now everybody works at home, so that's not a big deal anymore. Thank you, internet. But it's finding that moment when you figure out how to solve the puzzle and get it to come together. It's like something you hadn't thought of before. And that McCall Mountain trilogy is just full of those things. I loved writing that so much. I would happily spend the rest of my life just growing those characters. Maybe not the rest of my life because all good things. But growing those characters up. Oh, I'd love to let's see how they do for the rest of middle school. Let's take them into high school and they'll have, different situations. I don't think we're going to get there. But for the time that I had the opportunity to be with those characters and make their world, wow, it was fun.
Well, I wouldn't worry too much about it, Trent. I think you'll be able to go way into the future with a lot of this stuff. I'm going to have to cut it short because we're about 3:15, and I think folks do have some other things, and they want to be polite and not leave you.
Oh, sorry about that. Well, I don't keep you. You can always ditch my book show.
They're getting so much from what you're talking about. But I want to thank everybody for being here. And I appreciate your joining with us. And I'm going to stop the recording and then we'll see what happens. There's always a surprise after that. So